Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Florence School of Regulation. We have today an online debate on the new governance for renewables. We would like to know where Europe is heading in terms of renewables. As you know, they are one of the pillars of the energy and climate policy of the European Union. There is now a strong debate on what we do next after 2020. And so let's discuss about it in parallel with discussion and debate at the European Parliament and at the Council. Today we are very lucky. We have three experts from the field and from academia that will allow us to discuss some of the topics that are mostly debated at the moment. And we discuss this topic also with you, with the audience. So remember that you have a Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen where you can, greeting us as you are doing right now, but you can later also provide some comments, some ideas, some questions, some issues that you would like to discuss together with us. So who are we? My name is Nicola Rosetta. I'm a researcher here at the Florence School, involved mainly with electricity and more in general European energy policy. Then we have three very important speakers, very important and friendly guests of the school. We have Alberto Potocnik, director of ACER, so let's say from the organization that coordinates and promotes the cooperation of the European regulators for electricity and gas. Then we have Mario Ragwitz, professor at the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, so one of the countries where renewables are have the most interest. And then Dirk Hendricks from the European Renewable Energy Federation, ERF, that is joining us as well and will share his knowledge with us. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, of course, to the several participants that are attending the debate. So let's start. We have, as you know, the Renewable Energy Directive under discussion at the Parliament and at the Council. There are several contentious issues. We chose three of them to consider today. The first, maybe the most easy to discuss, at least informally, is the target for 2030. As you know, Europe set about 10 years ago a target to be achieved by 2020 in terms of the share of total final energy consumption produced by renewables. As you can see from this first picture, we are on track to achieve this result. Several countries already achieve it. Others are a bit behind, but probably overall the Union will get it right. The target was equal to 20%. Now, of course, we have to discuss what to do next. And to see how much ambition Europe should have, well, it's important to have a look at what happened recently. And as you can see from this chart and from the comments probably that the speakers, the other guests, will provide you shortly, you can see that the improvement that Europe achieved in the past 10 years was by a significant degree provided by new renewables, by a bigger role of renewables in electricity generation. It's really one of the most important aspects. The debate now is very intense. The Commission came out in the Clean Energy Package for all Europeans with a target, 27%. It was the same target agreed by the Council in 2014. But now some people suggest it's not enough. The Parliament wants more. Some of the European electricity companies are on the same vein, and this is quite remarkable change. international organization like IRENA says that something more could be done. So how brave should Europe be? And well, I would like to ask it to you. So we will have our first poll. You have several options. I pick a few of them. How high should the target be for Europe by 2030? 27%, 30%, 35, 45, more, or none. Maybe you can argue we don't need any target at all. So please vote. Of course, the percentage is in terms of total final energy consumption, so it's the same metric used in European legislation. I will give you a few seconds more to answer. A preference starts to emerge. A few seconds, I would say almost all have voted. Chiara, maybe you can close the poll and provide the final results. Who is the winner? So I would say that clearly most of you, the majority, are in line with the recent decision of the European Parliament. And some of you, 7, are even much more ambitious, a bit like the WWF, who suggested the 45% target. So now I would like to ask to our panelists their comment, how they see this issue, what are the critical points, the critical issues related to the European target and its level. Mario, you can start.
Thank you very much, Nicolo. It's interesting to see the result of the poll, as it agrees to, as you said, the Parliament position, whereas the European Commission has proposed 27%, which was then agreed and confirmed by the Council. And we have recently looked in a study, in a meta study for the European Parliament, at all studies available, currently modeling a renewables target and looking at the economic and macroeconomic impact. And it's quite interesting in the sense that, first of all, there are little studies or few studies available on a very ambitious renewables target. Most studies studied the baseline scenario from 24% to maximum 35 or 40%. And what we have seen is, first of all, in terms of energy system cost, there is a ambiguous effect. Some studies give a slight increase in energy system cost with a higher renewables target. Some other studies say that it wouldn't have any impact, or even impacts reducing the energy system cost. In any case, one can say that the impact is only of minor relevance, and secondly, that most of these studies didn't consider the most recent reduction in costs we have seen from tender results in wind and PV. Secondly, for the macroeconomic impacts on GDP and employment, we see that the majority of the studies see a slight and moderate increase, with increasing ambition level of the target of about 0.3% increase in GDP, with a 30% target, and 0.7% for 35%. We see a significant reduction in fossil fuel imports for the EU of about 1% of fossil fuel, or 1% of European GDP in economic terms, due to ambitious targets, and which would bring then second round positive effects also for GDP. Of course, one critical issue is the interaction of a higher renewables target, which would be suggested by those kind of analysis, with the carbon target, where Europe has confirmed, let's say, the will to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% until 2030, and having a higher renewables target would also suggest actually a higher greenhouse gas mitigation target. And in that sense, it's quite interesting that in the European Parliament, a discussion has emerged on the carbon budget, and the carbon budget consistent with the Paris Agreement. And I think it is very important, when continuing and the discussion on the strengthening of the renewables target to align that and to look at the consistency with the ambition level at the for the carbon target, and to really start a discussion in Europe on the long-term carbon budget, not only focusing on the 40% target to 2030, and maybe also opening then the debate on the level of the 2030 target. Maybe one further aspect on the implementation on the renewables target, I think it would be important in order to have really commitment at the member state level and clear planning horizon for utilities, for electricity sector companies, etc., to have at least indicative targets at member state level. That would also be useful in order to align grid asset and generation asset planning. And last but not least, the electricity sector will play an important role. Therefore, sectoral integration between heating, electricity, and transport sector will be important. But the heating sector as such should also not be underestimated. Therefore, heat pumps, heating grids, solar thermal installations need to be still in the focus of member state developments and incentives, as the heating sector is such an important sector for the European energy energy sector as a whole. I think with this, I would like to stop here and give the word to one of my fellow panelists.
Yeah, no, you raised several interesting questions. Also, the issue of coherence with other policy instruments, and the fact that we do not foresee any national targets, binding targets for the moment. Alberto, do you have something to say on this issue, something that you would like to stress also from the regulatory point of view?
Well, one aspect, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to join this debate. One aspect that I would like to stress from what Mario was saying is the need of consistency. At the moment, the Commission is looking at revamping or reforming the ETS system. And one of the criticism, or the main criticism of the ETS system until now, it's that it has not delivered the sort of price signals to price carbon, and therefore to provide incentive for fuel switching or technology switching. And in retrospect, that should have been quite obvious. Okay, the crisis came unexpectedly, but even before the crisis, I remember in 10, 12 years ago, various commentators, and I was in my previous life a consultant, and we looked into that as well, came to the view that if the 20% renewable target were achieved, and if the 20% efficiency target were achieved, that by themselves, these two targets would have delivered probably between 16 and 18% reduction in CO2 emissions, which basically said, sort of 80 to 90% of the carbon target, which means that the ETS system would have only needed to deliver the remaining 2 to 4%. And considering the renewables are not probably the cheapest way of reducing carbon emissions, there were a lot of cheaper options available there, which could be prompted by the ETS system at relatively low prices for allowances. And that is what we've seen. I mean, then the crisis came on top of it. So, beyond efficiency, there was also an economic downturn, and basically the carbon target was achieved with allowances prices at zero or very close to zero. So I think I very much subscribe to what Mario was saying. We need to have a consistent approach, and I think all these targets should be discussed together, and to make sure that they not jeopardize each other, because I don't think if the ETS, which I believe is fundamentally the right approach to try to reduce carbon emissions, if it fails again in terms of not delivering the right signals or appearing redundant, so to speak, I think it will be very difficult to have a second, rescue of the system. Mm-hmm. In terms of instruments, perhaps I can say a bit more later on when we're looking at integration, because obviously when we have say 50% of electricity coming from renewable sources, obviously the way in which renewables are promoted becomes very important in terms of market robustness and stability. I think that's where I would stop at the moment.
Yeah, we will come back to this shortly. But first, I would like to hear the opinion from Dirk. What's your view on the targets that the EU should set for itself?
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. Representing the European renewable energy sector, it is somehow naturally that we would like to see, of course, a very high target for the 2030 framework. At the time, I can tell you that the discussions here at EU level had been quite intense over the last 2 years, and we were always advocating for a 35% target. What I can tell you is just the latest update that we had from the European Parliament yesterday is what we have seen is that, of course, the new figures that the European Commission had provided in the impact assessment and on the economic costs also kind of like support the findings from the IRENA study that also has recently been published about the goal. So I guess everything between 30 and 35 is currently on the table. And I mean, what I can tell you is that, for example, here with the European Parliament to go for a 35% target, so 35 on renewable energy, 35% on energy efficiency, that this is the sort of like the favorite position of the European Parliament. And what we then have is that the European Council, who is still, let's say, very reluctant to see any kind of increase. What is quite interesting is to see the kind of like position that recently Commissioner Cañete mentioned to think about a 30-30 kind of like landing. 30-30 renewable energy and 30-30% of energy efficiency, because Cañete is very well aware that when he will go to Katowice for the UNFCCC conference at the end of this year, that he needs to deliver a little bit on the EU promises, and I mean this would be definitely then higher at what is currently on the table. What I would also like to encourage you is to have a look at what had happened in the Swedish Parliament recently. They have passed a motion in which they commit the Swedish government to check for a 35-35 solution here during the trilogue negotiations. So yes, it will be certainly quite interesting to see what will then be the outcome of these trilogue negotiations. From our side of view, is this what needs to be taken into consideration? It has been mentioned already from the previous speakers, is definitely to recall the Paris Agreement and the goals that has been mentioned there. In this case, we encourage that the EU is building up linear targets and not to postpone the uptake of energy efficiency and renewable energy towards the end of it. So, and then for the second thing is based on the experience of the last years, specifically under the current Renewable Energy Directive. It has been also acknowledged by, for example, Commission and reports and also other analysts is that if you're going to provide high targets, you set a very strong investment signal. Which investment framework, investment security, and then it is somehow doable to reach high targets. Thank you.
The idea is to ignite the momentum for renewables. Let's see if also other parts of the world are going to do the same or not. Okay, so this was the first topic. In the meanwhile, I remind our audience that they can start typing questions in the Q&A chat box, so they can already start. But let's move to the next topic, integration of RES in the electricity market. Because another clear point in the clean energy package was the idea that renewables, at least some of them, are becoming more mature and should need to, let's say, run on their feet and be able to provide a growing share of their income via the market, on a market-based way. There are already opinions on this, in the clean energy package, both in the renewable directive and in the directive and regulations concerning the electricity sector, there are several suggestions. I see already Acer commented on some of them. I invite the people interested to look at this nice report by the International Energy Agency on the future of power markets with higher shares of renewables. As Alberto already said, when renewables are a lot, well, rules must change. They cannot receive the same privileged position, the privileges that enjoyed when they were still in their infancy and, let's say, marginal in the generation mix. I would like now to involve you, the people that are listening to us from home or their offices, on two questions that are treated in the clean energy package. Do you think that priority of dispatch for renewable energies generating electricity is still needed? Yes, no, only in some cases, and for the plants that already enjoy this priority of dispatch, or maybe you do not know and so you remain neutral. Please vote. As you know, this is an item covered by the clean energy package. There is the Commission as a position on it. Let's see what's your view. I will give you still 20 seconds to vote. Don't be shy. Express yourself. You will vote is secret, so you will not be persecuted for any choice. And I would say, Chiara, that we can, yes, we can close the pool and broadcast the result. Perfect. So I see again a majority, but not at all absolute. Well, almost absolute, but not yet. Most of you are in favor of leaving priority of dispatch, so the right to access the electricity grid first without suffering any constraint, only for small power plants and for demonstration plants, so for technologies still not fully developed. So we do not have in mind an onshore wind farm, but maybe a plant producing electricity from ocean energy. Alberto, you can start first commenting this this poll. What's the view of the of Acer on this?
Yeah, I mean, the agency does not have any role in defining support scheme for renewables. So I want to make clear that my comments are only related to how these support roles interact with the market, the support mechanisms. What we see is, the priority dispatch was introduced originally when the electricity sector was based on average costs. It was centrally dispatched. The central system would take all the costs, would make an average, and then consumers would pay the average price. Now, this was a few years ago, and now most of the markets in Europe are actually, I would say all of the electricity markets in Europe are actually working on the basis of marginal prices, i.e. marginal cost defining prices. And that's where we see potentially a problem of maintaining a technical problem. As I said, we do not enter into the merit of priority dispatch or the merit of supporting renewables. I mean, we take it for granted that they provide benefits and they should be supported. Is the way in which they're supported that we sort of we meant to comment. And when you have with market coupling in Europe, and when you have sort of price signals coming from market defining not only the cost, the price of electricity in the market, but also the directional flows between different member states, or between different price zones, to be more accurately. Then priority dispatch may represent a problem, and here it depends. I mean, there are two possibilities. Either priority dispatch is granted by keeping the renewable plant in the merit order, which means that the marginal price or the marginal cost of generation, which is the one that determines the equilibrium price in the market, is actually determined by a renewable plant which would not be in the merit order but ends up being in the merit order because of priority dispatch. Then you may end up prices which do not reflect the normal merit order in that price zone. And in this way, you might actually get electricity flowing in the wrong way. Mm. And that was our concern, that, to the extent that priority dispatch might affect the equilibrium prices in the different jurisdictions or in different price zones, it may provide incorrect signals for cross-border flows of electricity. To the extent that this is not the case, then it only becomes a matter of prices, because if priority dispatch does not affect the prices, but it's only some plants receiving more than they would somehow get from the market, then it becomes a matter of support, and these plants most of the renewables are actually zero, quasi-zero marginal cost technologies, and they can easily get priority dispatch by bidding their actual cost, receiving from the market the equilibrium price, and then the support will cover whatever difference there is with respect to what these plants may be entitled to. Now, this is so. In this case, priority dispatch becomes a bit redundant. On top of this, and this is where we see a technical issue in the functioning of the markets with priority dispatch, and this is why we do not differentiate, in a sense, between existing and new infrastructure, new plants, because this is a technical problem that affects, that relates to any renewable, any plant with priority dispatch. Now, this problem is clearly the potential problem. This type of problem is clearly exacerbated if we are talking about renewables amounting to 50–60%, because usually electricity takes a much higher share of renewables than the overall target. So at the moment, with 20%, we've seen that the electricity sector gets around 33–35%. So if we are looking at targets between 30 and 35%, we can expect to have, electricity targets or a share of electricity generated from renewables in the order of 50+%. And if you have priority for more than half of your generation assets, then also the notion of priority becomes a bit less obvious, because everybody gets priority. But that's a circumstantial comment. I think where we are concerned is more about the potential interference between the priority dispatch and the well-functioning of the internal market, especially when it comes to market coupling.
Thank you. I fully understand. So before giving the possibility to Dirk and Mario to further comment, we have another poll on, let's say, very similar, and then I will give you the possibility to reply. Do you think, you, the audience, that the current market design for electricity in Europe is fit for a generation mix with a high share of renewable energies? Please vote. You have less option now, yes, mostly. So if you are not totally convinced but not totally negative, no, don't know. I will try to give you a few seconds, but not much, because we have still a lot of things to discuss. So vote. And I think that we can close the poll, Chiara. So I see there is a clear majority, much clearer than the other, in favor of the third option. So most of you think that the current market design for electricity is not fit for renewables. Nobody actually said it is fit. Some are, let's say, a bit satisfied, but not totally. And the most have really a negative position. So now I come back to the panelists, to Dirk. What's your view, okay, on the topic already addressed by Alberto on priority dispatch and on the result of this new poll? Please.
Okay, well, from our side, priority dispatch is certainly quite a crucial topic for us because we kind of like believe that for the moment we unfortunately do not have yet a kind of like level playing field in the electricity market. If you're going to look at it, generally the European markets or national markets as we have currently are characterized mostly by overcapacity from nuclear gas coal power stations. We have certain capacity markets that underline this. What also needs to be taken into consideration is that there are continued subsidies specifically for nuclear and fuels, which are also deteriorating the price signals and markets. And then we see this in a number of member states that we have a kind of like natural merit order effect concerning priority dispatch. What you see is that, like for example, nuclear power plants cannot be that fast ramped down in case there is too much electricity in the grid, and then mostly due to technical and administrative issues, you have a curtailment of renewable energy installations instead. Now, I mean, we see that in most of the EU member states, luckily priority dispatch does not play a big role anymore. So I guess in this case, for the, let's say, legislation that is currently under discussion, we could imagine that a kind of like compromise as proposed by the time by Agora Energiewende, meaning that priority dispatch is only there for those countries where, let's say, it is still necessary simply due to the, let's say, certain market condition. This would be a possibility, I guess. For other countries, it is luckily not that necessary anymore. If we're going to look at the current legislation proposals that are on the table, yes, okay, priority dispatch will be phased out. That is clear. I guess what is really quite good as compensation here is that there are the curtailment rules are quite okay as they are proposed. So yeah, in this case, there it would be okay then to phase it out. Coming the question if it should be existing plants, here you just need to be careful and not to destroy investors' confidence. But for new plants, yes, under the certain circumstances, and if there are certain protection for certain states, no problem. Yeah.
Okay, so quite clear. So in part you agree with Alberto, but you also highlight some some issues that deserve particular attention. Mario, you have a quick comment on this before running
yes,
to the last topic?
Very quick.
Please.
First of all, yeah, thanks. First of all, in general terms, I agree with Alberto, and I think everything or many aspects have been prepared and the ground is provided such that large-scale renewable energy plants don't need priority dispatch anymore. We see a clear tendency towards market premium systems, which are also clearly requested by the state aid guidelines of the European Commission, and therefore essentially the vast majority of renewable energy plants will be either supported by a quota system where there's no priority dispatch needed, are not supported at all, like for example large hydropower plant, or are supported under any type of premium system, in particular mentioning here the floating premium system or the contract for difference in UK, Italy, the Netherlands, Germany, so in most member states. And therefore, I think the general problem Alberto identified or presented here doesn't really exist any longer, because the vast majority of renewable plants has always been in the market or is in the meanwhile in the market. However, I also agree with Dirk. I think if asking for priority dispatch for existing plants, in particular for small-scale existing plants, is a retroactive measure, and I would therefore strongly oppose that, and in particular as it would concern all the small-scale plants which are not voluntarily in the market and under premium schemes, particularly small-scale PV plants. And this is, I think, negligible in terms of the problem that Alberto has lined out. And therefore, I would ask for de minimis rules very similar to the European Commission of 100 kilowatt or the order of that, and of not including small-scale plants, in particular small-scale plants under the de minimis rule, as the costs of actually equipping these small-scale plants by control units and real-time control in order to be dispatched by the market would be actually would not be justified by the need for market integration of these plants. But yeah, so in that sense, I agree with both my fellow panelists, and that would be my concluding remark on that.
Okay, I understand. Alberto, are you okay? You want to?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Mario in the sense that, you know, our concerns were mainly for the wholesale market. Obviously, small-scale plants either do not participate or do not affect. I mean, in the wholesale market, so that is not an issue. The issue is more with those plants which, for their size, participate in the wholesale market. That's where, you know, we are concerned about the price signals feeding into wrong directions of flows.
I understand. Okay, but maybe in 10 years with the aggregators, more demand response, even cheaper sensor, we will have to come back again to the issue. But now the last topic of our debate, cross-border participation in support scheme. This is another topic that is highlighted by the current discussion, and it's a topic I would say that was quite neglected in the past 10 years, because some of these provisions about statistical transfer of renewable production, about joint projects, were already in the previous version of the Renewable Energy Directive, the one currently in force. In the new, but they were almost not implemented. Last year there was an announcement that Luxembourg will go to is going to buy statistical renewable energy from another country. There were a couple of cases of joint support programs for renewables between Germany and Denmark, between Norway and Sweden, but not much else. Now, in the new proposal, there is a clear article, if I'm not wrong, Article 5, requiring member states to open their support schemes, their support programs, to participation from generators located abroad. So to increase the cross-border participation, the reciprocal participation in support scheme. And I would like to ask you, the audience, is this really a problem? Are member states looking narrowly at their, let's say, national interest, at their national constituencies, when they support the deployment of renewable energy? You have 4 options, very easy, yes, no, let's say a bit, but not really so much, or you do not know. Please provide your idea, and then we will discuss with Dirk, Mario, and Alberto. This is maybe the easiest poll. Okay, so there is a clear majority. Maybe, Chiara, we can close the poll. Most of you, and broadcast the result, most of you clearly says that member states do not look much farther than their backyard, than their constituency when they plan support scheme for renewables. Dirk, do you think is a good answer? Do you agree or not with this quite quasi-standing answer with few exceptions, please?
Well, I mean, let's say it in this way. When we look at the debates at both the stakeholder and government level in various member states, we see let's say different positions. We see, for example, that people try to defend, let's say, let's say national interests wherever possible, because they strongly believe that, for example, take for example the Austrian government, that they would best, not Austrian government, sorry, Austrian stakeholders, that they would kind of like get best support from national support schemes rather than, let's say, for example, doing it jointly. What we have seen is if you're going to look, for example, at the German-Danish joint auction here on PV grid or so, which worked certainly quite well, but I mean it also raised concerns that you kind of like can create quite some social resistance, because people may say, why do we need to pay renewable energy installations that are based in another country? So this is definitely one concern that we have in this. When it comes to joint projects that are, exactly as you pointed out, always or had been a possibility, I would like to point out to a recent project that has been carried out, among others, by the, I guess, Heinrich Böll Stiftung and also the World Future Council and Friends of the Earth Europe, where they looked into these kind of like cross-border joint projects that there are, for example, something going on between Germany and Denmark. There's also between Germany and France. And I mean, I guess why here the problem that remains is mostly that you have the first of all, there are language barriers, but I mean then because you are on local level, you see that a lot of rules and procedures are very different just on the other side of the border. So just to align it, you have quite a lot of practical issues that are really very hard to overcome. And I guess here we will certainly see some positive developments within the next 10 years. But I mean, these are here, when it comes to concrete projects, the main barriers. And then when it comes to statistical transfer, yes, this is definitely one of the tools that will become now actual. We have, unfortunately, some member states who have difficulties to reach their 2020 targets. Here, Luxembourg has reached or done now the kind of like first deal with the Estonian government on this, and I guess for Estonia it is certainly quite a good possibility to get some financial rewards for overfilling their targets. There are currently some talks between various governments going on to enhance these statistical transfers, and there are also considerations among those countries who have reached currently their 2020 target to even step up their efforts in renewable energy development, because they see that they can now earn quite well from these statistical transfers. in this. So we will definitely see under the new government schemes that is currently provided that these kind of cross-border participation and regional cooperation projects will certainly increase. Yet there are still many practical issues, mostly on local issues, to be taken into consideration.
Okay, I understand. And by the way, you're already targeting one of the participant questions by Norbert, which was exactly referring to this kind of issues, statistical transfer. Is it a problem? Is it okay? Mario, your comment on this? Do you like it as statistical transfer or not?
I mean, starting with the first question, whether there are national interests and whether one has to look at specific measures to overcome these national interests, I think, yes, clearly, we know that renewables bring local employment, local value added, local reduction of air pollution, etc., etc. So there is a completely understandable natural interest of building renewables within the domestic borders. On the other hand, of course, from the European perspective, least cost resource allocation and improved system integration are clear arguments for a more European perspective and building the plants where the resources are best and where system integration aspects are best facilitated. And therefore, from my perspective, I was really in favor with the original Commission proposal, which asked for mandatory physical or mandatory cooperation with certain quantitative benchmarks in the year 2025 and 2030, which was not fulfilling any of the extremes, neither a full Europeanization of the support and on the other hand, breaking up the 100% nationalization. And I think in particular, the first examples like the Luxembourg case and agreement with the Baltic states really shows the beauty of European cooperation and the win-win situation. It's a win situation for the Baltic states, which can export their access in wind energy, and it's a win situation for the Luxembourg government fulfilling its targets at lower cost. And therefore, I think we should really take up this idea and further strengthen it for the 2030 package. And I think I would like to repeat that I think that the Commission has made a good proposal in that sense. And it's a bit watered down by the Council agreement. And my wish would be that it's a bit strengthened again in the trilogue.
Okay, yeah, clear answer. It was, I think, about 10 million was the payment from Luxembourg. But now, Alberto, how do you see this topic again from the perspective of the European regulators, the regulators of the European member states?
Well, the agency promoting the cooperation of national regulators, that would be more. So again, we do not have a specific remit on this. I would say, I would actually stress what Mario said in terms of here there is a trade-off. Clearly, the least cost solution is a solution where you have a European market, so you have full cross-border participation. On the other hand, there are localized benefits from renewables, and here's where renewables are different from greenhouse gas control, emission control, because now everyone accepts that we have a European market for allowances, because that's a global. They have a global impact. Emissions of greenhouse gases have a global impact, which is not the case of renewables. So it's really a trade-off, and it's difficult. And that's why, for example, the first attempt back in 2007-09 of the Commission to introduce, trading of certificates failed because they tried to replicate the same scheme as it was proposed and accepted for emission allowances, but on aspect and policy goals that have different implication when it comes to the geography of the effects. So I think it's a trade-off, and if we're looking purely at impact on the electricity prices, then you would say that probably a full cross-border participation is one that minimizes such an impact, but obviously there are other impacts, other effects in employment, on technological development, etc., which obviously play quite an important role.
Oh, we still to strike a balance. Yes. So now we have few minutes. We will more. We will try to have a look at the audience, at the question that they raised. Maybe we will be able to address a couple of them. In the end, we already discussed the point raised by Norbert. So we can, well, Karel is talking about ETS and carbon leakage, so probably the topic is not on the point. Simon goes back to the issue of priority of dispatch in a context of negative prices. Do you think that they can become relevant again when negative prices become more on wholesale electricity markets become more and more common? Does someone of you want to answer to this question by Simon?
Maybe I can say first. Well, I think that negative prices are neither are not an argument for a return to priority dispatch, because the beauty of having renewables integrated into the market based on premium schemes is exactly that renewables would react to the dispatch signal. And if the dispatch signal gives a very strong negative price, then that should also affect the dispatch of renewable energy plants. There is some debate about the fact whether renewables should still receive support during negative prices or not. My opinion here is that actually there's a renewables value which we as a society attach to the production of electricity from renewables. For example, in the tradable green certificate system, the TGC price is the renewables value which we consider as a reasonable estimate of the benefit of renewables to the overall system. And therefore, under a quota system with tradable green certificates, renewables, where there's no priority dispatch, by the way, renewables would produce until a market value of the negative level, or which is in absolute terms on the negative level, as the tradable green certificate price. So if the TGC price is 50, then you would produce until electricity price of minus 50. And I think that is a reasonable situation, and therefore, from my point of view, there is no implication of negative prices or not on the fact whether priority dispatch should be maintained or abolished. I rather think that member states should be allowed to continue support during the period during negative prices, and there's this 6-hour rule, and that is something to be debated.
Dirk, do you have a quick comment on it? Do you want to say something?
I definitely agree to hear what Mario has just said. What I also would like to put into consideration is that the new market design legislation proposes also quite a lot of possibilities for renewable energy producers, how they can deal with it. What is really quite interesting to see now is that the new business models that are popping up, and I mean exactly as it is, the price signals, but I mean also the specific intraday markets that are there, selling prices within 15 minutes intervals and so on, clearly can show this. And I mean, we see that the market is already, or that producers are already reacting, like for example to investigate storage possibilities when it comes to batteries, when it comes to hydropower, looking for example also how to do sector coupling, which is also a possibility to get rid of surplus electricity at certain times. So there are quite a number of possibilities there, and I mean the feedback that we have from our members is that this is a kind of like welcome opportunity to look into it, and exactly, I mean it's a reaction to price signals. Yeah.
Alberto, something else?
Well, very quickly, I agree with I think with both Mario and Dirk in the sense that the concern that they've expressed about the potential interference of priority dispatch with market functioning would remain, even if we, the negative price in that respect are just prices. So, we have the concern will remain.
Okay. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so we will not be able to address the other 2 or 3 questions raised by the auction. I beg your pardon. But before leaving you, we have just one last thing to comment. Of course, if you enjoyed the debate of today, if you have still questions, if you want to learn more, well, be aware that we are organizing a training. Mario is the director, but Alberto is in the faculty, and also myself. This training will take place in Florence, here at the Florence School towards the end of May. I don't know if Mario wants to say very quickly something to say why it's good. This training is could be useful.
Yes, I think the aim of the training will be to give a very comprehensive overview on the 2030 package as it's of now, and in particular on the most recent policy developments for renewables. We will have an in-depth assessment of current auction design and auction results and implications for market participants and also from regulators' point of view. Alberto will give an excellent overview on the market design debate and its implication on the integration of renewables. And then last but not least, the arena will frame that into the overall global international development, and Clemens Kremer will really give a very great case study on renewable auctioning with one particular example on offshore auctioning. And so it will be a very timely course on the most recent and fascinating policy developments for renewable energies in Europe.
So take note and consider it. Really, you will meet people from the academia, the institutions, the industry, and not only with a focus on Europe, but also beyond Europe. Well, just to know that this debate has been recorded. It will be available if you want to see it again. If you want to write to us, please do. Well, I will thank a lot Alberto, Mario, and Dirk for having been with us today, for having spent this hour with us and with their knowledge and their experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
And I want to thank the audience.
Well.
We had quite a good audience. I see the name from a bit everywhere in Europe and beyond. Thank you, and see you next time online or physically somewhere in the world. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Best wishes from Brussels.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.